Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel titled Organizational Economics of AI. This panel is hosted jointly by LMU's Institute for Strategy, Technology, and Organization and NYU's Center for the Future of Management. We plan for these joint panels to be held semi-regularly, and we'll mention about our next panel at the end of today's panel. Today, we have three of the most well-known experts on this topic: Daron Acemoglu from MIT, Jacques Bughin, a retired director from the McKinsey Global Institute and now advisor on technology at Accenture Research and part of the technology board of the European Parliament, and Raffaella Sadun from Harvard Business School. Here is the format. We will start with some brief introductions of each of the panelists, and then we'll jump into a moderated discussion. After that, we will take audience questions, but one programming note, please use the Zoom Q&A feature to enter your questions. And again, we'll get to those about halfway through the discussion today, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So with that, so my name is Rob Siemens. I'm a professor here at NYU. I'm going to turn things over to my partner in crime here, Tobias Kretschmer.
Thanks very much, Rob, and welcome also from my side. I'm just going to very briefly introduce three people that don't actually need much introduction, but just to follow protocol here. So Daron Acemoglu is an institute professor at MIT, and his work, which I'm sure many of you have read, covers a wide range of areas, including political economy, economic development, economic growth, technological change, inequality, labor economics, and the economics of AI. Jacques Bughin, besides his research on AI when he was at the McKinsey Global Institute, currently teaches disruptive strategy as professor at the Solvay School of Business of Economics and Management in Brussels, and he advises multiple companies and VC investors on topics related to AI. Raffaella Sadun is a professor of business administration in the strategy unit at Harvard Business School. Raffaella Sadun, her research focuses on managerial and economical and organizational drivers of productivity and growth in both the private and the public sector. She is currently on leave of absence from Harvard, working as an economic advisor to the Prime Minister of Italy. So let's start by briefly setting the table, so to speak, so that we know where everyone's coming from. So I'm going to start with the first question. To all three of you, is the impact of AI on the economy and society a net positive, a net negative, or the economist's favorite answer, it depends? So put differently, are you generally positive, negative, or indifferent about the current direction of AI in our economy and society? And I'm going to first ask Daron to share his thoughts on this question. You need to unmute, Daron.
Sorry, I've done this like 1,000 times and I can't believe I made that mistake again. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. And you said the economist's favorite answer is it depends. So yes, it depends. But it depends in a very important way. I want to make 2 points in response to your first question. First of all, I view AI as a very broad technological platform, or what people used to call a general purpose technology, meaning that it can be used for many different things. And by its nature, therefore, its direction matters greatly. And it's impossible to say whether it is negative or positive without knowing what that direction is and what it will be. Having said that, of course, AI has been around for a little bit, not for too long, but it's a little bit spreading rapidly. So there is already beginning of a direction. And that direction is shaped, of course, by influential companies on the producer side and on the consumer side of AI. And on that direction, I see it as largely negative. But obviously, there are different ways in which different types of AI approaches are being used. Obviously, some of it, such as DeepMind's AlphaFold, has a lot of promise, a lot of hype, but also a lot of promise in achieving, three-dimensional folding of proteins on the basis of their amino acid structure. That's a very difficult problem that has eluded people, and DeepMind and AI have not solved it, but it will be a useful tool. It will be a useful tool in people's hands. And that, I think, is the hallmark of positive AI. If it provides tools to people to do things in a new way, in a better way, I think AI has a lot of promise. But what goes on under the AI rubric today is mostly harvesting, collecting and harvesting of an enormous amount of data, and use of those data for monitoring workers, expanding the ad-based business model of many big platforms such as Facebook and Google, and automation of certain tasks that are fairly well performed by humans, but some companies may still, for one reason or another, prefer to be automated, and none of those I see as hugely positive. Why not? Well, I think there are a lot of problems with ad-based business models that are becoming more apparent. Monitoring of workers and monitoring of citizens, as by the Chinese government or other authoritarian governments, I think is a horrible thing. And I think automation of narrow tasks could be a positive or negative, but at the moment, AI is being pushed too much into doing that in a way that does not deliver much productivity gain and leads to a lot of displacement. And there is a risk that it will turn out to be a big negative if it goes much more in that displacement direction. So hence, my sort of bottom line is that at the moment, what we call AI is really a lot of data harvesting, and most of that is negative.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Daron. Provocative thoughts. Jacques, I'm going to turn it over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I share Daron's viewpoint, which is that it's possibly a good net positive, but it really depends on the way people will scale it and will use it. So a few observations before I start to some example, start and give some examples. The very first one, as a general principle, technology per se does not lead to net positive or net negative. It's obviously the use of it. That's first observation. Second observation, AI is, I guess, at a point where the winter is gone. We're in the spring of AI. And I believe the promise linked to the GPT side of it is quite strong. So I believe we should do everything we can to make sure that the GPT aspect of it is actually going to be fulfilled, simply because today we need much more productivity in the economy, and the GPT performance of those technologies seems to be extremely strong. Point number three, let me answer your question by providing my own definition of AI, because it will frame, obviously, what I'm talking about, as well as the consequence of that definition will lead to my discussion as whether it's positive or negative. So for me, the definition of AI, and is a very pragmatic one, is a set of technologies that leverage different forms of data and a certain type of deep machine learning algorithms that help operate high cognitive functions. So if you think about that definition, it gives directly some hint to your questions and my answer. It's obviously a positive because everything which is linked to cognitive functions leads to fantastic potential linked to innovation. And we know innovation is a great way to firm performance and to productivity and to gain in society. But the definition has a clear watch out as well, because the cognitive function today are pretty much fulfilled by human. And that means that it can lead to substitution of labor. And on top of that, because it's using not algorithms per se, but the data, there is a risk of data abuse. There is a case for bias and lack of transparency in the algorithms, which we need to create watch out. Still, I will say I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Daron, but I will say I will add a few subtleties to the question on data, for instance. I think there is a lot of risk linked to data and to data control, but the data that we produce every day is fantastic, and it's real time, and it's possibly more high value in the future of data than the data that exists today. So I'm not so sure whether data control is easy to get. It's not about the data control. It's about the sites that basically concentrate where the new use of data will be used. Is for me more of an important issue. The second point, the fact that we have so much data opens a great scientific breakthrough, because in social science and economics, as we know, we had to invent certain type of statistical modeling, because we cannot replicate experiments. There was just no data to do it. And today we're just moving into real social science because we can much more experiments. So we can go more into the risky zone of experimentation to try and the like. And I think it's going to create a lot of innovation. And when we talk about substitution of labor, I guess it always has happened in the past. And in exchange of that, we have had a growing pie of productivity. And on top of that, the way that the social structure is worked out has been that we work much less. And it could be that one of the first aspects of that labor substitution will be that we're going to work 3 or 4 days a week instead of 5, while before we're working 7 days a week when technology was not even existing. Last but not least, I think one point we don't discuss that much in terms of what is good or what is bad is that we talk quite a lot about net positive as an average, but I think it really depends on who you talk to, and I think it's a logic of segmentation. On the user side, let's assume that you are retired from job. Maybe AI will create fantastic breakthrough in health, will make your life much better, and you're going to live longer. So possibly it's AI positive. But if you happen to be a low-skill labor in the countryside, that you're not rich, your only source of value creation is your work, and you can be displaced by AI, then it could be a negative. So I think it's a very important question, but we need to create a segmentation logic behind that, because I believe that the AI impact is very different from who you speak to.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Jacques. Now, Raffaella.
Well, I mean, they've said it all, right? So, of course, my answer is, of course, it depends. It depends because, as Daron said, and I think he's argued very well in what he's written over the past few years, it's clear that, first of all, there is a lot of confusion when people talk about AI, and there is a ton of hype. But then, as Jacques said, once you look inside this term, there is also a lot of different definitions that are coexisting. So it's very difficult to give you a definite answer. I can tell you personally, I am not that excited about the narrow applications of AI. I'm not excited about the, I feel like the dumb approach of automating one process and then claiming that you are at the frontier of technology. I am very, very excited, though, about the use of AI as one part of a broader set of levers. So, for example, companies that use AI and at the same time are thinking about incorporating employees' input into the use of new processes. Companies that are thinking about internal training, making sure that the technology is actually usable and can leverage, principles of continuous improvement. And fundamentally, I think it's the notion of technologies that think about a team of a human and a machine. I am very interested in these applications. I think I'm with Daron that companies are not really not many companies have figured it out, but I'm a little bit optimistic because that is inherently a very difficult journey that we know. It's a journey of co-invention that takes years. And so if you really think about AI as one of those fundamental shifts in technology, it's going to take a while before companies figure out. But companies that are doing that, I think, are giving us a sense of AI as a proxy for some broader organizational capabilities that we know matter for productivity. and could be a good sign for progress. Fundamentally is also the idea of thinking about AI not as a technology, but as a way to augment human talent that I think is the core of the question here. There is a ton of discussion and hype around this concept. That's what techno-optimists often say. I think we need to investigate and understand under what circumstances this specific application of AI, this complementarity can really take place. So from that standpoint, I'm excited about that. I think we have a lot to discover about that specific use of AI.
Thank you all for giving us your initial thoughts on AI, good, bad, or it depends. I want us to start to sort of zoom in to focusing on organizations in particular, right? So the title of the panel is Organizational Economics of AI. And so for the next couple of questions, again, let's sort of keep organizations in particular in mind. And I'm going to pick up on a point that I think all three of you touched on, but I just want to make it very explicit. So why do you think that there's so much heterogeneity across organizations in terms of why and how they adopt and use AI? Okay, so that's the next question. I'll start with Jacques, then Raffaella, and then Daron.
Yeah, well, when it comes to new technologies, I think we've seen that the adoption is actually quite variable, and that's nothing new regarding AI. On top of that, we just finished quite extensive work into the use of AI on the functional level within the enterprise for Accenture research. And what you find is always the same, which is a very classical power law where a few, let's say 10% of firms makes 50% of all the use case and basically deliver that across the enterprise. So what makes that heterogeneity is actually 5 things, I would say, if you look at the organization level itself. The very first one is that there's an endowment issue. Companies who have been very good in mastering for a long time anything which is digital, which knows how to work with clouds and all of that, basically will leverage AI as a next wave because there is complementarity in the set of technologies. The second set is obviously the organizational leadership. This is an enterprise transformation. AI can only scale and really makes a difference in terms of the revenue growth, innovation, and the like. It's really used across every function and angle of the organization, which means that you need obviously some traction and top down from the leadership side. So leaders really makes a difference if you look at companies. Point number 3, and it's correlated, obviously, each of these elements are correlated, but it's about uncertainty. There are uncertainty, not necessarily in the business case, but uncertainty as to what kind of use case really scales. So it varies across industries. Use cases that are linked to marketing and sales are quite easy to operate. When it comes to use case linked to let's say operations or production, especially in the case of manufacturing, you need very precise AI. You don't have a lot of data to do this, and on top of that, this AI possibly set into robotics, which means it's much more complex to get the case to work. So again, there is an industry dimensions to it. But the 2 factors which I think it's really making the difference whether you are at the head of the distribution in the power curve or you are just in the long tail of the easygoing AI users, if you like, it's the architectural design. I think AI is not only about data. You need to get the AI platforms really well thought through with a front-end technology. You need the analytics. You possibly need to figure out the third-party integration because you will not do everything yourself. So you need a framework for that. You need obviously to think about the language, the algorithms, the storage capabilities, and you name it. So a lot of companies today, from the architectural perspective and the design of the backbone of that, it's more than an IT problem. It's an IT technology and obviously facilitation of the use case design aspect. There are a lot of companies are just not good in doing that. And last but not least, AI is not about doing things better, marginally better. AI has a huge scope for doing things radically different. And so that means that you need a strategy renewal for that. And you need obviously, and that strategy renewal will lead especially to a future of work, but a future of skills, because at the end of the day, the business model innovation linked to AI on top of the technology usage requires a new form of skills and HR organization. And these five elements, you can mix it by industry. They're not having the same weight, but most of the time, this is really what makes a difference. The good ones master the five. Let's say the great ones so far master the five. Most of the other guys are just experimenting or not scaling or doing that at a very functional level. Let's say in sales and marketing, and are not there yet at the level of the scalability and makes the point that you make, which is a lot of companies are pretty much not at the level of convergence at this stage because they're just not mature on these 5 dimensions.
Thanks. Jacques, thank you so much for laying that out across those 5 dimensions. I think that's sort of like a useful framework for us to keep in mind as we move forward. So next, I'll turn to Raffaella again for this same question in terms of why so much heterogeneity across organizations, and feel free also to respond to anything that Jacques said, for example, on leadership, skills, uncertainty, and things like that.
Yeah, look. So I think that the basic principle is what we know also from previous technological waves. The use of a technology is never, I would say is almost never, does not depend on the quality of the technology itself. It depends on the way in which this technology is implemented in the context of the organization. And so that's just another way of saying there are complements to the use of computers, the use of Excel, and there are complements to the use of AI. That's, I think, the general principles of complementarities. This is what makes technological adoption an interesting problem and a tough problem to figure out for organizations. What makes AI, in my view, so difficult is that it goes to the heart of changes. It requires some changes that, think about it. It might require a different approach to decision making. You have to rely on data or the data that has been elaborated by an algorithm and not by your hunch. And as a manager, I can say that this is quite, it can be a tough issue for some people. It requires different skills. And interestingly, from research, we sort of are starting to understand that it's not just the cognitive skills or the coding skills. It's actually much more about the soft skills, the ability to coordinate knowledge that comes from different pockets of the organization. There may be issues that have to do with changes in tasks, and there may be resistance, as there always is in organization in changing tasks. And there may be trust issues. So all of this, if I reflect on all these difficulties, I'm surprised that even some organizations are getting it right. I mean, if you think about it, it's actually a really tough issue. And I was recently reading a paper, Daron just published a paper that surveys the adoption of AI across a large sample of US firms. And it's surprising because companies don't adopt AI because they want to just automate. They tell you, Daron, if I'm correct, that they say they want to improve business processes and they want to improve quality. So the intentions, I think, are there. And then we have to reflect on what are the frictions that are an obstacle for these intentions to be realized. And in my view, again, at a very high level, I think I would think about 2 types of frictions. One is cognitive at that very top. So the leadership point that Jacques was mentioning, totally resonate with me. My sense is there are too many leaders and executives that think about AI as a technology and not as an organizational, as a lever for organizational change. And I would add, they have no idea how the technology is actually used by their employees. I have wonderful students at HBS, and people who are really using AI effectively in their firm, they spend time on the shop floor. They see how the technology is used by people. They get a sense of the software and the hardware change that needs to be there for people to actually leverage the technology. It's a very different approach to technology adoption than just getting a software company in and doing their thing. And then, of course, there are the implementation failures of bringing all those complements together, bringing trust, building trust in the organization. So, but I would say definitely with Jacques that we have a lot of work to do in, I think, teaching executives what the technology is, what can it do, and also the amount of effort that is needed to really realize the benefits.
Thank you, Raffaella. And a couple of times you mentioned Daron in particular, and so I think it's a perfect time to turn to Daron and give him a chance to respond.
Thanks, Rob. Well, Raffaella and Jacques have already given excellent answers. Let me give a three-layer answer to this without taking too much time. The last one is the most important one, where I'm going to go back to some of the things that Raffaella had said. First of all, it's the dirty little secret of organizational economics that we still don't understand why some organizations do things well and others don't. So whatever you look at, you have a tremendous amount of heterogeneity. So let me give one example from another technology that's related but distinct from AI, robotics. I have looked at data from the Netherlands, France, US, and Denmark, and it's just very difficult to predict which firms are going to adopt AI. Even if you look among large firms within the same industry that have their act together, only a subset of them do. It tends to be those that are more productive, and they tend to be those that are more digitally savvy. So they tend to do it together with other digital technologies, as Jacques has also hinted at. But we don't exactly know. And robotics, I think there are very clear benefits for the right firms in the right industries. And you see that in the data. And despite that, even large, well-established firms don't always do that successfully. In the case of AI, another paper of mine shows that using, for example, measures that Rob himself generated, which we use, thanks Rob, and other measures, we find, for example, that establishments, even within the same firm and in the same industry, that have more tasks that can be replaced by AI, narrow tasks, tend to do it more. But that's only one of the dimensions. It doesn't explain most of the variation. But that links to my third point, which goes back to what Raffaella emphasized, and I want to spend 2 minutes on that. I think there are many different ways of using AI. And the reason why I was negative in response to Tobias's first question, Tobias and Rob's first question, was because exactly what Raffaella said, which is that a lot of AI is right now being used at a narrow process level as a cost-cutting measure. And that does not really work very well, and it's really not commensurate with the promise of AI. And I think differently from robotics, robotics, I think, is a much narrower technology, and you do it so as to automate certain manual tasks. You can get productivity improvements and greater fidelity in certain things, but that's not the best way of using AI. And a lot of managers are doing that. So in some sense, there's actually a difference here. In the case of robotics, I think you can ask the question, why are certain firms failing to invest in robots? I think in the case of AI, it's more like, why are some firms investing in AI, but doing it the wrong way, maybe even more important? So let me go back to actually to the essence of what Raffaella wanted to emphasize very successfully. But I want to go back to 60 years to people who actually had started thinking about machine intelligence, but not the way that we have now come to accept machine intelligence as a way of use a lot of data to do prediction. But for example, let me read a quote from J.C.R. Licklider, who was one of the pioneers of sort of thinking of how we can best use machine intelligence. he says, the hope is that in not too many years, human brains and computing machines will be coupled together very tightly, and that the resulting partnership will think as no human brain has ever thought and process data in a way that not approached by the information handling machines we know today. That was 60 years ago. And even then, the promise was very clear. And I think with today's technologies, this type of complementarity is completely feasible. And by that complementarity, I don't mean like super science fiction things like brains implanted into humans' minds. No, machines become a tool for the collection and presentation of the right type of information, for leveraging the skill, judgment, creativity, flexibility, social learning, and situational learning of humans. And very few organizations are doing that. And I think that is a failure of these organizations, but more importantly, in my opinion, it's a failure of the field of AI. Managers are following what AI leaders are telling them, and AI leaders are not telling them, are not hyping up this type of use of AI. They are hyping up exactly what Raffaella complained about, cost-cutting process level AI use. And I think in that sense, we are in an AI trap, and we might be heading towards the bottom very fast, unless, exactly the things that Raffaella emphasized, we take them seriously.
Fantastic, thank you so much. You actually already answered our next question. So we can actually, let me just mention again to the audience that if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And I'm going to now basically turn to
Tobias?
Yes.
I wanted just to add two small anecdotes to Daron's and Raffaella's organization Zoom. Again, basic mathematics tells you as well that the organization challenges are much bigger than people have anticipated. As a basic example, if you look at tasks that could be easily substituted by AI, and you match that with the normal skill base of any type of organization, you come to conclusion that you're going to have to reskill. But most of the time, these tasks will be a mix of at least 5 to 7 generic type of intelligence. It could be emotional intelligence, creativity, technical abilities, you name it, analytics, and you name it. And if you really want to do that problem of matching tasks with skills and distribution of skill and task, this is a massive matrix if you look at this. And the matching of that, when you do the maths, basically means that you need, on average, to train people on average on 3 out of 5 new skill set, not one skill set. By the way, a lot of the skill design today is on one skill, and barely 20% of the people use them. 80% never do any upskilling during their own organization life. So if you put that together, it's a massive internal marketplace that you need to build with new format of skill matching, which is not the same as the skill matching that you have when you have a huge, let's say, post-merger management, when you put 2 banks together, where already there you have to do that. So although I said what I'm trying to say here is that it's not that AI will require one skill set. The matching is that you're going to have to move and reskill people 3 times more than the normal matching function that you have. So that's a huge challenge that you need to realize. The second one is the fact that if you think about who owns what in an organization, that's a lot about people and power. And at the end of the day, you used to have the IT guys that basically control his budget and the like. The platform is becoming much more bigger, but it's moving into technology and technicalities, not necessarily IT. It's moving to decentralized, i.e. the functional guys would want to have his own analytics and the like, so it's decentralization. And at the end of the day, you see all this battle happening. So there is a lot of organizational structure, system and skills, and that is a lot. So the organization setting of that is amazingly complex. So it's no wonder why it is complex, and it will take time. I don't think that you will see a lot of organizations handling that so easily at scale without this massive organization change. And that's exactly the point that Raffaella was saying. The future of AI, it's a future of organizational change.
Fantastic, thank you. I think Raffaella, you were about to respond directly to that.
I mean, look, I think at this point, the point of what needs to happen. So as an academic, I tell you three things. One, we need to get closer to the action, right? We really, what Jacques just said, what Daron was saying just a minute ago, there is a lot about interaction between machines and humans that we don't know about. And we don't know, especially the places in which we are getting it wrong. So I'm saying, I think we should really get, how scientists go to visit the penguins if they want to understand penguins' behavior. I think economists need to get inside organizations to understand how these things are happening, right? So this is one. Two, there is a lot of work that needs to happen in how are these technologies even designed? I mean, the point that Daron made on, technology, perhaps AI development itself may have something to do with the situations in which we are today. Daron, I think you're absolutely right. I work for research with the human-computer interaction experts, and the way in which they think about technology adoption is very different from the way in which a person that does not really know how humans behave thinks about coding, for example. So that's point number two. Point number three about reskilling. How I'm working right now trying to set up an HBS reskilling lab. So all we want to do is to study how companies reskill their employees. I hear reskilling mentioned everywhere, large organizations, small organizations. Lots of money is being spent on this. Do we know what works? Do we have a sense of the policies and the approaches that are working or are not working? My suspicion is this is one area that may be very complementary to understanding how AI works. And we need to do a lot of work because reskilling, I don't think it's so as easy as sometimes is described. Having a person changing professional identity, learning new tasks when we don't even use our normal, expertise. This is a massive challenge. And I think we need to do a lot of work to really understand it and push the agenda here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Raffaella. And I think it's a great segue into a question that Christina McLaren is asking in the Q&A. She asks, we talk a lot about organizational complements, but we don't know a lot about the ordering of these investments and adoption decisions. Does it matter which comes first, the tech or the management practices / objectives? Do firms need to build up data and cloud capabilities over time, or can they do a big shift of many things altogether? And if the latter, does this raise the risks or adjustment costs? Who wants to throw the first stone here?
In my class, my MBA class, I'm about to go and teach in about 1 hour. Whenever there's silence, I tell my students that the ones that it looks like they're on a device, I'm going to call on them first because I'm sure they're on a device thinking hard about the question that was just asked. And so I'm looking around the room here, but I can't quite tell who's, okay, Raffaella, you raised your hand first, so you're up first.
No, I was saying I'm not on a device, so call the other two.
Well, I can give a very quick answer. We don't know. I think that's an excellent question. We don't know. We just, I think there are two ways of approaching that question, which are both complementary. One is by collecting data. The other one is by working within organizations, which I'm sure, Jacques has done and Raffaella's lab will do soon. But I don't think there is a corpus of information on that from practical side. On the data side, there are almost no data sets that have information on these different types of technologies. The paper that Raffaella was mentioning is based on a new census data that collects information on AI, cloud, robotics, specialized software, and dedicated machinery, and hopefully that data can be used for answering it, but right now it's just for a cross-section, so timing-related questions cannot be answered. So it will be a panel soon, longitudinal soon. But at the level of cross-section, we know there is a lot of complementarity, and it's the kind of complementarity that you expect. Cloud computing is a very important part for firms that are using software and AI. They tend to travel together, but which one comes first, and how do you actually leverage the necessary investments, especially once you factor in the questions that all three of us have been emphasizing, better use of AI for creating new tasks, new products, new organizations. I think that's completely open. So we'll love to get other people's insights on that.
And Christina, by the way, may be the person who is going to provide an answer to this question soon. So.
Fantastic. Jacques?
Yeah, I think Daron called upon me on that, but I would say there is no general rules. I think it's not about over-designing policies and the like. I think the top-down does not work. It's not like tomorrow we're going to become an AI enterprise. At the end of the day, as you know, the dynamic capability framework tells you that you're going to need to embed these technologies in terms of processes in the first place, and it goes by try and error. And most of the time, I would say that AI pumps up where it's the easiest part to be playing. And as I said, sales and marketing do it because it's all about information sharing. It's a lot about data mining that you can get. And the algorithms, by the way, use a brutal force of machine learnings. They're not necessarily that precise. They are better than other ways to do things, but they're not yet at the level of what top-notch AI will become possibly in a few years' time. So again, my experience is that you don't necessarily have to plan or to overstructure. De facto, there are a few things that you need to watch out in the chaos of development of these technologies into an enterprise. It's obvious that you should not do it if you haven't been able to be successful in your digital transformation. It would be stupid to try to do it if you don't know what you want to do with AI. And again, if AI is just there to add a few extra marginal aspects on the cost that leads to a marginal cost decline, or a few extra on the revenue side, who cares? It tends to be a fundamental scaling technology, which will require this to be used by pretty much everyone. And a rule of thumb, by the way, when we talk about B2B software technologies, at least from my own experience, is that you need pretty much 40% of your organization to use it and know how to use it in multiple functions to really make this thing scale. So that's a big, big number. And that means that you need to find ways to make sure that whatever decentralization ways of doing these things, at a certain point, you have a bit of harmony and scalability and a bit of not necessarily centralization, but at least policies to make sure this thing is not wasted. And by the way, I think it's always wise to have both top-down and bottom-up. I think the top-down will say, how many people are just using this technology and for what? I mean, as an experience, if you look today, not on AI, but look simply at software as a service, it's a great market because everyone within the organization think that they can they should use this software on the service side. And when you aggregate all of this software, the bill looks huge, and the marginal benefit of it is totally crazy because there is no synchronization. So I think the question is not either or, I think it's and, like every organization. You have to centralize and decentralize in the same times, and the subtlety is around that. By the way, one point we didn't discuss conceptually, but it's very important. AI is actually a technology that makes information's flow much better within the organization. It's all about data inside that and possibly predictions that you can from the data that you use. So that means as well that you should not think about AI just within the set of the organization that you have, but there's a huge implication in terms of information cost, simply because the information cost goes down. So that means that possibly your big company is going to have to be much smaller. So that's the cause issue, the cause theorem. At the end of the day, the market will solve by itself. So you will see a lot of decentralization and much more flexible unit and much more agile unit. So your question again is also not a question of decentralization and centralization. It's what level of structure does AI require to be effective? And I think it will be much smaller as a unit of operation than what we've seen in the past.
Jacques, thank you for that. I'm actually going to use that as a jumping off point to come to one of the questions that we've gotten. But by the way, we're getting lots and lots of questions, which is great. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but keep them coming, and we'll see how many we can get to. So this is a question from Michael Impink. Jacques, I think it's right to the point you were talking about a moment ago about this, centralization, decentralization, outsourcing issue. So I'm going to ask the question, but I also want to use the question as a jumping off point to start talking about regulation and policy and sort of the role that government can be playing here. So here's the question. In most cases, using AI in organizations requires lots of cloud resources. Does this mean that firms will be further reliant on 3 large tech firms, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, that supply cloud services? Is this something that we should be worried about? So that's the question. Then I'll just sort of tack on, are there sort of policy implementations that maybe could be used to offset whatever our worries might be? And then more generally, other types of policies we should be thinking about. So that's the question. Again, Raffaella, Daron, Jacques, who wants the first bite at this apple?
I can give my personal sense. Again, yes, AI will require more flexibility in terms of the storage, in terms of the information flow. So it's going to be cloud-based. But even the cloud itself is improving dramatically. So that's like in telecom in the past. If you like, the question is how much more of volume of information do you need to get to this pipe? And before it was a telco pipe, this time is possibly going to be much more other type of service providers. That's point number one. Point number two, again, the cloud is only one part of the total pie of the platform, if you like. It's part of the infrastructure, but the platform layer, which is how what you develop in-house and what you have as a third-party solution, the integration of that's going to be, I believe, even more important than the cloud itself. And I think, let's be very clear, like in the outsourcing world in the past, it's not about operation here. It's about a lot of algorithms, a lot of different data, and you name it. That integration piece will require system integration, will require obviously architectural design, and that means that different type of firms will be involved in that work. Does that mean that you're going to rely even more on a certain type of people or companies? The answer is likely yes. But frankly, even if you are locked in certain way into this stuff, I don't want to go too much into the discussion of the regulatory policy there, but I don't think it matters a lot. The value is not residing in the cloud and the like that enables you to do this. There is enough and I think there is enough of competition for the price point not to extract all the value. The value will come from the fact that you have integrated these technologies in the way you work and in the way that you competitively work out in your own market. So I think it's a bit of an oxymoron to think that the backend is going to be the battlefield and the dependence. At the end of the day, there's so much value if you use the AI correctly. And that's what we see in evidence. We see that the value that you generate from the best firms in terms of productivity and revenue explosion, not on the cost side, but it's twice as big and twice as fast as what we've seen in the classical digital transformation. So that's the focus I will get. And just as an extra in terms of the regulatory perspective, I think one aspect of regulatory perspective I'm much more worried about, because the tools of regulations are not necessarily designed for that, is that companies like the big internet guys or AI guys have a talent to basically go in buying a lot of very small, very clever AI firms or technology firms. So the M&A is not the classical horizontal M&A, it's a lot of small firms, so they go below the radar screen. And after that, when they got the platforms, they will possibly release it in the open source as a strategy to be the best player, if you like, for the lock-in. That is the aspect where I think a bit of regulation could be a good thing, but I don't know how it will look like and what's the best way to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Jacques. Daron, you've
I know time is short. Let me give a 30-second, because I think it's a very important issue, and thanks for bringing it up, Michael and Rob. I think it's the dominance of large firms in the digital and AI space, I think, is very worrying. I don't think cloud is the most worrying part of it, because cloud architecture is such that, by providing cloud services, you may charge more through regular monopoly prices, but the cloud architecture will not enable you to exploit that data or powerfully redirect technological change along specific lines. I think the areas where really I worry about the future of AI and future of digital technologies are those that enable firms to monopolize data, and are those where firms have a oversized effect on the future of the future direction of technology. So that intersects with what Jacques mentioned: Google, Microsoft, Amazon buying startups. That really means that a few people on a boardroom determine where the technology is going to go, and then a huge amount of data monopoly that's emerging. I think those are the areas that really we need to watch out for, and in particular, this issue that, again, coming back to what Raffaella said, what we said earlier, we want more people-focused and people-centric AI. Well, that's not going to be possible if a few firms that have a different business model dominate the future of technology.
Thanks. Raffaella?
I think on this specific, if I may, I'd love to make another point that is related to policy different from regulation. I mean, I completely agree with what Daron just said. But this issue of who benefits from AI is really important. And on the one hand, you might think that smaller firms may be able to use these technologies more effectively because they're smaller, they're more nimble, they're more agile. But then you look at the reality, and it turns out that companies that are already digital and already large, that can really exploit the scale economies that arise once you use AI well, are probably better placed. Once all these complements click, they're probably better placed to reap the benefits of this technology. So if I may, I think from a policy perspective, what may need to happen is to make those type of reskilling and adaptation easier for all sorts of organizations. This is where I see a policy gap. We've thought that all these transitions, this adjustment to new technologies was effectively, I think traditionally, especially if I think about the trade literature and the technology literature. Of course, we knew that there were winners and losers, but we also thought, well, the losers will figure it out by themselves at some point, or there will be some adjustment. I think what we need to understand with this type of technologies is that organizations may need some help to catch up. And from a policy perspective, I would see, for example, a role for incentivizing training within organizations, providing more subsidies for training inside organizations. I would also see some roles from, creating maybe some sort of best practices of how do you actually teach people new things. It's a far west right now. There isn't really a clear sense. And so that's maybe a complement to the work that needs to happen by teaching technology people to develop more people-centered AI, but perhaps we also need to provide some infrastructure so that organizations engage with that type of adaptation. I don't think it can entirely fall on the shoulders of private firms. I see a role for policy there too, if that makes sense. And that's the reason why, by the way, I'm in Rome and not in Boston right now, precisely to think about these issues.
Thank you, Raffaella, and thank you for taking time out of the busy and important work that you're doing to be with us. But by the way, one thing that's interesting in the discussion that we've just had is it's also helped to address a question that William Lair had around the effect of AI for small and medium enterprises, and so I think that we've touched on that as well. So Tobias, over to you for the next question.
Excellent. Yes. So I think we're going to end with a really nice nice final question here by Ozan Aglargos from Anadolu University, and the question is: are we going to live the Jetson or the Matrix version of the future? Jacques, would you like to give your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm on the spot. So can you just elaborate a bit more about, because the question is very broad, so I just want to make sure that I don't spend all the time on it.
I mean, in the simplest form, you can just say yes or no.
Well, again, as I say, technology can be totally overhyped, but I think the Gartner stuff has shown it that we possibly going to still overhype it. It takes a long way for this technology to really change organizations and the like. I believe that the technology itself well, all these technologies as families are complementing each other and basically create flying wheel that makes the cost curve going down dramatically and the potential being there. Would it be the metrics? Yes and no. I believe that they would be part of that, but you're possibly going to still take 10 to 15 years. That's my bet. That's my bet.
Excellent. Daron.
But, I think a lot of the fears of AI are based on overpowered AI, superintelligence, etc. And optimism about AI is based again on super intelligent, wonderful AI. I worry about mediocre AI.
Yeah.
And I think mediocre AI can do a lot of damage. Actually, it's sort of funny. It's like, it's even in the imagery that the people who worry about super intelligent AI has mediocrity in it. So one of the favorite tools is that they explained this is Nick Bostrom's paperclip analogy. So you tell a machine to produce more paper clips. AI is super intelligent. It finds more and more ways of turning matter into paper clips. It turns the whole universe into paper clips. Well, that's stupid AI. It can't even understand that we need a finite amount of paper clips. But that's exactly what we have to worry about, which is that we are using machines for things that have great promise when humans do it. Humans are very skillful. Humans are the best at most of the things that we're trying to get machines to do. Machines can be help to humans. But if we try to make humans more and more subservient by data collection, by monitoring, by surveillance, by eliminating them from the more meaningful parts of the production process, I think that's where we're going to get the worst part of the paperclip problem. Yeah. So yes, Matrix-like, but not because of the superintelligence, but mediocrity. That's what I worry about.
Cool. Thank you, Raffaella.
Yeah, I'm going to end with how we started. It depends, right? I think it depends on who develops it. It depends on who uses it. And so I think the broader point, which is at the same time frightening and optimistic, is that it's entirely up to us. And the extent to which there will be a critical mass of organizations, of developers, of policymakers that believe that it's possible to shape the technological development and the usage of this technology. I don't think we should be scared by the complexity of the algorithm. We should probably find easier ways to interact with it. But again, it's entirely up to us.
Great.
Raffaella, just to add to this, I'm looking at my kids, 10, 15 years old. That's where you observe what AI can do. And the worry, some aspect of it is that today, obviously, they use their mobile as the default to speak to their parents. And on top of that, TikTok is obviously a much better way of watching videos against the way that we didn't like it, where we were forced to choose between 3 recommendations by Netflix or Amazon. At this stage, they don't have even 3 potentially ways to watch. There is somebody just doing it, and it's so easy to do it that they don't have any perspective and they go with the flow. So I'm also concerned on the TikTok element, on the super AI, which is the behavioral economics aspect or the nudge aspect of it, which today can be so smooth and can create some consumer abuse, much more anything else, especially for the young generation.
I can relate to that very well. I have constant fights with my daughter about how much the algorithm is making her watch videos of 1 minute length. So I think we need to close here. So I think there were a number of aspects that we couldn't get to discuss. There were some questions on ethical AI and biases, whether they're strengthened or weakened. There were a couple of questions about, predictions, which I basically tried to get you to voice your opinions on a little bit. But I think we're really at the end, and so thank you very, very much, Raffaella, Daron, and Jacques, and thanks to everyone for joining, everyone who joined this program. Just to give a quick sneak preview, the next event in our speaker series is going to be on June the 16th at 11 a.m. New York time, 5 p.m. Central European time, so an hour earlier. And we're going to have our next two speakers, Tommaso Valletti from Imperial College and John Van Wienen from LSE and also MIT, to discuss the role of superstar firms in the economy. So for more information and to sign up, please visit stern.nyu.edu//CFM. And stay tuned for more information and more events. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Rob,
Thank
and
you.
Tobias
Thank
for
you all.
organizing it, and Raffaella.
Thank you.